All right, Caroline, let's play a little game.
Okay.
In your opinion, which is the best planet in our solar system?
Well, Earth excluded,
Yes,
right?
exclude Earth, please.
I have to exclude Earth, because naturally I would say Earth. I mean, it's where we live.
Right.
It sustains our lives. But, I don't know, Saturn maybe?
All right, so it's very interesting that you say that. There was an article in The Atlantic that appeared recently. In fact, there were two articles. The first article was written by Adrienne LaFrance. There you see it there. She called it, "Jupiter is the best planet." A couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, another article appeared in The Atlantic. This time it was published by Ross Anderson, and his article was titled, "A Major Correction, Saturn is the best planet." And that is causing a lot of online debate. So this week, as we pointed out, The Atlantic published this counter article.
Right.
And we want to talk to somebody who's going to know a whole lot about this. Derrick Pitts, he's our friend over at the Philadelphia Planetarium. Excuse me, he's the chief astronomer at the Philadelphia Planetarium and director for the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, and he joins us now to talk about this. So, Derrick, I'm guessing you read those two articles, right?
Yes, I did.
So, first of all, before we even get into the science, what is your favorite planet?
Okay, so it used to be that very early on, Jupiter was my favorite. Then Saturn became my favorite planet for obvious reasons. But now, you know, I'm really hot on Mars. And I'm hot on Mars because, you know, I'm a hands-on kind of a guy, and I love the idea of being able to head out to Mars and do some exploration. So Mars is my big target these days.
I like that. That's a good answer.
So let's talk about, my favorite planet is Jupiter because it's the biggest, it's the baddest. I love the fact that it's got that, so give us a little bit of the science. That big, beautiful orange eye in the center of Jupiter, what is that?
So what we call the Great Red Spot on Jupiter is actually like a large hurricane, like a big storm in the cloud atmosphere of Jupiter. And this object is large enough that you can fit 3 to 4 Earths right across it. But it's extraordinarily turbulent, and in that atmosphere right there where all that activity is going on, the temperature is about 230 to 250 degrees below zero, and the material is made up of like nitrogen, ammonia, hydrogen, helium, all those kinds of things as frozen ice crystals. So it's really a dynamic spot, and it's a really big place.
What about Saturn? Can you explain to us, first of all, what that orb around the planet is, and what is so fascinating about Saturn? It's a lot of people's favorite.
I think the reason why Saturn is chosen by many people as a favorite is because of that gorgeous ring system. They are just beautiful. They surround the whole planet. And I think what people have is a fantasy of being able to walk on the rings or skate on the rings or any of those sorts of things. And you have to realize, of course, that the rings, there are actually hundreds of individual ringlets that are all bound there together. And they help with, you know, there are moons that help keep them in place and things like that. So it's a really beautiful spot also.
Derrick, what's also interesting, though, when it comes to comparing these two planets, they're both two of the older planets in our solar system, right? They were formed right after, some people say after the Big Bang, and they're not as young as, say, for example, Neptune or Saturn. And part of what this article said, and it was really interesting, you're able to know that because of the richness of hydrogen and helium on those planets. Why is that? How is that able to tell us the date of the planets?
Well, the way that helps to tell us the date of the planets is that we know that early on in the history of the solar system there was a lot of hydrogen and helium around to form the sun. And so this hydrogen and helium, of course, being unbound into anything really complex, indicates that they took up a lot of the hydrogen and helium left over from the beginning of the solar system already. But those two planets also played another major role, and that is they acted sort of like big brother and big sister to us by protecting this planet Earth from the impact of a lot of asteroids and meteoroids very early on that allowed our planet to develop to the point where it could harbor life. So Saturn and Jupiter also played that very, very, very important role early on.
And what about Pluto?
Little Pluto.
Is it a planet? Is it
little
not
tiny
a planet?
Pluto. Derrick, you and I have we've
planet?
talked about Pluto, Derrick and I, in the past.
We have, but the last time we talked about Pluto, Vlad, we didn't know anywhere near as much as we know now. So I have to say that Pluto's beginning to get a little bit more of my attention too, because it looks really great. It has all kinds of interesting features. And the other thing is, it shows on the surface that there's some kind of process going on there that we could not possibly ascribe to a planet at that distance from the sun before. So it's turning out to be like a whole newly discovered planet in our solar system.
Derek, there's one funny. I also used to, before Jupiter, I was a big Venus fan because Venus from Earth looks so beautiful, and I used to imagine that Venus was probably Earth-like. And Ross Anderson in his article, he wrote a really funny line here. He says, Venus grows lovely in the sky, but its atmosphere is a hellish, sulfur-smelling place with temperatures hot enough to melt lead. And he says Venus is useful only as a cautionary tale about the runaway greenhouse effect. What do you think of that?
You know what? That's funny on one hand, but on the other hand, it is a really good model that we can use to look at what could happen in that particular case of a runaway greenhouse model. That's exactly what Venus is. Now, you know, the likelihood of that happening here, not very high, but just the same, like he says, a cautionary tale. But you know, one thing I'll mention about that actually, Vlad and Carolyn, is that if you're out in the pre-dawn sky, under the pre-dawn sky, say 6:30 in the morning these days for the next week or so, you can see brilliant Venus over on the eastern horizon, and you can get a look for yourself and decide if you like Venus or if you like Jupiter, because Jupiter is high in the south at the same time.
I have got to get a telescope.
You gotta
and start
get
doing
one.
more
Me too.
stargazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you have binoculars, use those. They'll work pretty well too.
All right, so Derek, he's Mars, you're Saturn, I'm Venus. Thank you very much, Derrick Pitts. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.